The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and disappointment. David Foster sat uncomfortably in the chair across from George Henderson, watching the elderly attorney shuffle through papers with the enthusiasm of a man reading grocery lists. The oak-paneled room felt smaller by the minute as David's cousins exchanged knowing glances. The reading of his grandfather, Robert Foster's will, had been underway for 20 minutes, and so far his cousins had received the farmhouse, the good land, and the cattle. David waited, wondering what scraps were left for him. The ancient ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, barely moving the humid Iowa air. David tugged at his collar, feeling sweat trickle down his back. At 40, he'd expected to be in a better place by now, not sitting in a lawyer's office, hoping for anything that might ease the financial pressure crushing down on him since the divorce. George Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. "And to my grandson David, I leave my 1952 Ford 8N tractor currently located in the old barn." The lawyer peered over his glasses, his expression unreadable. From across the room, Steve Foster, David's cousin, snorted loudly. "That piece of junk engine seized up 10 years ago? Hasn't run since Bush was president. The first one." The family erupted in muffled laughter. David felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. The room suddenly seemed suffocating, every pair of eyes fixed on him with a mixture of pity and amusement. His throat tightened as the memory of sitting on that very tractor as a boy flooded back. His grandfather's weathered hands guiding his smaller ones on the steering wheel, the rumble of the engine beneath them, the smell of fresh-cut hay and diesel. Henderson continued reading, but the words blurred together as David's mind raced. A broken-down tractor. That was his inheritance. No land, no money, just a 50-year-old piece of farm equipment that didn't even run. What was he supposed to do with that? How would this help with Jason's private school tuition, or the mortgage he was struggling to pay on his modest house after Lisa took half of everything in the divorce? As the meeting concluded, David stood on wooden legs, nodding mechanically as relatives offered condolences that felt more like mockery. Steve approached, slapping him on the back with too much force. "You inherited the broken tractor," his voice carried across the room. "Maybe you can sell it for scrap. Might get enough for a nice dinner at least." Steve's laughter followed David out the door. The summer heat hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. His tie felt like a noose. Loosening it, he gulped in the fresh air, trying to clear his head. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Jason asking how the will reading went. 12 years old and already worried about money. No child should have to shoulder that burden. David slid into his car, the vinyl seats scorching through his slacks. He started the engine but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, he sat there staring at the stoic brick building where his family's legacy had just been divided. He remembered more clearly now. Summer afternoons riding on Grandpa's lap as they worked the fields. His weathered hands would guide David's on the steering wheel, teaching him about responsibility, hard work, and the value of taking care of what you have. "This old girl's been with me since before your daddy was born," Grandpa would say, patting the hood of the tractor affectionately. "Treat her right and she'll never let you down." The memory hit David with unexpected force. That tractor wasn't just metal and rust to him. It held memories worth more than any monetary value his family could assign. In that moment, sitting in his overheated car, David made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. He was going to restore that tractor, not because he needed it, but because Grandpa had trusted him with it. Maybe he saw something in David that others didn't. Maybe he knew David would be the only one willing to put in the work to bring it back to life. The drive to pick up Jason from summer camp felt longer than usual. Each mile took him further from his family's laughter and closer to understanding why Grandpa had left him what everyone else considered worthless. Jason was waiting at the camp entrance, baseball cap pulled low, shoulders slumped in that particular way of preteens trying to look cool while feeling awkward. As Jason climbed into the car, his eyes immediately searched his father's face. "So, what did you get?" The boy's voice carried equal parts hope and resignation, as though he had already prepared himself for disappointment. David took a deep breath. "A tractor. Grandpa's old Ford 8N. Jason's face fell. "A tractor. Like to farm with. What are we supposed to do with that? We live in a subdivision." "It needs some work," David admitted, pulling away from the curb. "Actually, it needs a lot of work. Engine's seized up." "So it doesn't even run." Jason slumped further in his seat, gazing out the window. Steve and the others probably got all the good stuff, huh? David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yeah, they did. But you know what's what, son? Sometimes the things that look worthless are actually the most valuable. You just need the patience to see their true worth. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears, but something about saying them aloud made them feel more true. Jason gave him a sideways glance, skepticism written across his young face. Is this one of those life lessons where you're training to make something bad sound good? A laugh escaped David's lips, genuine despite everything. Maybe, but I'm serious about the tractor. I'm going to restore it. With what money? Jason asked the question, hitting like a physical blow, because it echoed the exact thought running through David's mind. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken worries. David's job at the insurance company barely covered their expenses since the divorce. Lisa had taken half of everything, then moved to Chicago with her new boyfriend, leaving David to raise Jason while paying a mortgage he could barely afford. The private school tuition was killing him, but he couldn't bring himself to pull Jason out. Not after everything else the boy had lost when his mother left. That evening, after Jason had gone to bed, David called Lisa to tell her about the inheritance. The conversation went exactly as he'd expected. A broken tractor. That's it. Her laugh was sharp, cutting across the phone line. God, David, only you would be excited about inheriting junk. Instead of wasting time with that piece of garbage, maybe focus on finding a better job so you can keep up with Jason's tuition payments. David pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting back the retort that sprang to his lips. The tractor has sentimental value, Lisa. You can't pay bills with sentiment, she snapped. Jason mentioned you've been late picking him up twice this month because of work. Maybe focus on being a better father instead of playing mechanic with some ancient farm equipment. The call ended with Lisa reminding him that tuition was due in 3 weeks, her tone making it clear she expected him to struggle with the payment. After hanging up, David sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by bills, the weight of single parenthood and financial pressure heavy on his shoulders. Later that night, he found himself searching online forums about Ford 8N tractors. The more he read, the more he realized the magnitude of what he was attempting. The parts list alone was daunting. New engine components, hydraulic seals, wiring harness tires, seat paint. The costs added up quickly, far exceeding what he could afford. Yet something kept him scrolling through restoration guides, parts catalogs, and forums late into the night. Perhaps it was the memory of his grandfather, or maybe it was simple stubbornness, the same trait Lisa had cited as reason for their divorce. Whatever it was, by the time David finally went to bed, his resolve was stronger than ever. The drive to the old farm that Saturday morning felt like a journey back in time. Jason sat beside him, headphones on, clearly unconvinced that this was a worthwhile way to spend a weekend. The boy had been quiet lately, struggling to adjust to life after the divorce, to a mother who seemed more interested in her new relationship than in her son. David hoped that maybe, just maybe, this project might give them both something positive to focus on. The old Foster family farm looked smaller than David remembered. Steve had inherited the main property but had no interest in farming. He'd already listed it with a real estate agent, hoping to sell to developers who would likely turn the generations-old farmland into cookie-cutter subdivisions. David parked near the barn, a weathered structure that leaned slightly to one side as if tired after decades of standing against Iowa winds. This was all Grandpa's land when I was your age, he told Jason, who reluctantly removed his headphones. Over 400 acres. He built that barn himself with his brothers back in the 50s. Jason looked around, seemingly unimpressed. It's just a bunch of fields and an old barn. It's more than that, David replied, leading the way to the barn door. This land fed our family for generations. Paid for your mom's college, actually. Mine too. The barn door creaked on rusty hinges, protesting as David forced it open. Dust particles danced in the late afternoon sunlight, streaming through gaps in the weathered boards. The air inside smelled of old hay motor oil and decades of accumulated farm life. Jason sneezed twice, waving away the dust. There she sat, David's inheritance covered in years of neglect and surrounded by forgotten farm equipment. The Ford 8N looked worse than he remembered. Rust had claimed large sections of the hood and fenders. The tires were flat and cracked. The seat cushions split and bleeding foam stuffing. Weeds had grown up around the wheels as if nature itself was trying to reclaim this piece of machinery. Jason circled the tractor, his expression shifting from boredom to something like pity. Dad, this can't be fixed. We should just sell it for parts or something. Get some money at least. David ran his hand along the fender, feeling the rough texture of oxidized metal beneath his palm. His phone buzzed with a text from Steve. Seen your treasure yet? Hope you're good with a welding torch. He ignored it and walked around the tractor, taking inventory of the damage. The engine was indeed seized. The hydraulics had leaked fluid all over the barn floor, and several essential parts were missing entirely. Any reasonable person would have walked away. The cost of restoration would far exceed the tractor's finished value. But as David stood there in that dusty barn, he could almost hear Grandpa's voice. David, anything worth having is worth working for. This old girl's got plenty of life left in her. She just needs someone who cares enough to find it. David pulled out his phone and started taking pictures documenting every angle, every problem, every challenge that lay ahead. This wasn't just about fixing a tractor anymore. This was about proving something. To his family, to Lisa, to Jason, and maybe most importantly to himself. This was about showing that some things have value beyond dollars and cents. That legacy isn't always about what you inherit, but what you choose to do with it. Jason watched him with growing curiosity. You're really going to try to fix it, aren't you? David nodded, snapping a photo of the engine block. Yes, I am, and you're going to help me. The boy's groan echoed through the barn. Dad, I don't know anything about tractors. Neither do I, David admitted, but we're going to learn, together. He meant it as a bonding opportunity, but the skepticism on Jason's face made it clear the boy wasn't buying it. By the time they left the barn, David's clothes were dusty and his hands were dirty, but his resolve was unshaken. He spent the drive home explaining his plan to a largely uninterested Jason who had retreated back into his headphones. The boy only perked up when David mentioned they'd need to find people who could help them learn the necessary skills. The next day, David called his old friend Charlie, who ran a small engine repair shop in town. If anyone could help him assess the real condition of that Ford, it would be Charlie. They had played high school football together before life took them in different directions. Charlie to technical school, and David to college. Despite the years and divergent paths, Charlie had always remained friendly, if not close. A '52 Ford 8N. Charlie sounded genuinely intrigued over the phone. Those are great machines, simple, reliable when they're running, but if the engine's seized, you're looking at a complete rebuild. I know it's a lot, David admitted, but it was my grandfather's and I need to do this. There was a pause on the line. This about more than just a tractor, isn't it? David sighed. Maybe. Lisa took half of everything in the divorce. My family got all the valuable parts of Grandpa's estate. I need a win, Charlie. Bring the kid on Saturday, Charlie said finally. I'll meet you at the barn. Take a look at what we're dealing with. David also reached out to his grandfather's old friend, Bill Morgan, who had been farming longer than David had been alive. If anyone knew about Robert Foster and his beloved tractor, it would be Bill. The old farmer agreed immediately to meet them, his voice crackling with enthusiasm over the phone. Robert's old Ford, haven't seen that beauty in years. Thought she might have been scrapped by now. You're a good grandson to save her, David. Saturday morning arrived with a clear blue sky and the kind of heat that shimmered above the asphalt. Jason was reluctant to get out of bed, but David managed to bribe him with the promise of burgers after they visited the barn. Charlie arrived right on time, his pickup truck loaded with tools that had seen more miles than most cars. Bill pulled up right behind him in his ancient blue Chevy, climbing out with the deliberate movements of a man who'd spent 70 years working with his hands. Introductions were made, though Jason remained standoffish, kicking at dirt clods while the adults talked. Charlie circled the tractor like a doctor, examining a patient, whistling occasionally between his teeth. Well, he finally said, wiping his hands on a rag, she's definitely seen better days. He started pointing out problems David hadn't even noticed. Cracked engine block, bent steering components, compromised frame integrity in several places. Bill was quieter, running his weathered fingers along various parts with the reverence of someone who understood the craftsmanship of a bygone era. They don't make them like this anymore, he murmured almost to himself. Bill, David asked, watching the old man's face. Be honest with me. Is this worth attempting? Bill straightened up, slowly looking David directly in the eyes. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles earned through decades under the Iowa sun. Son, that depends on what you mean by worth it. If you're talking about money, then no, you'll never break even on this project. He paused, placing his hand on the tractor's hood. Your grandfather and I used to work our fields side by side. This old girl earned her keep for 30 good years. She deserves a chance to shine again. Charlie's assessment was more practical but not entirely discouraging. The engine can be rebuilt, but it'll take time and patience. Most of the hydraulics need replacement, but the pump housing looks salvageable. The transmission seems solid. That's the expensive part if it goes bad. As the men discussed the restoration process, David noticed Jason had wandered closer, listening with unexpected interest. The boy crouched down, examining something on the tractor's frame. Dad, look at this. Jason pointed to what appeared to be markings etched into the metal. There are letters and numbers here. It looks like some kind of point. The three men gathered around, squinting at the faint markings. They were definitely man-made. A series of letters and numbers carefully scratched into the frame where they wouldn't be easily noticed. Your grandpa was always one for puzzles, Bill said, squinting at the markings. Never did anything without a reason either. David felt a strange sensation in his chest, something like hope mixed with curiosity. Do you think it means something? Bill shrugged. With Robert, always meant something. Question is whether we're clever enough to figure it out. By the end of the morning, David had a realistic timeline of about 6 months in a parts list that would cost more than his last vacation. But he also had something more valuable. 2 experienced men willing to help him bring this machine back to life. And for the first time in months, his son was showing genuine interest in something they could do together. When Steve's truck pulled up to the barn, the mood shifted instantly. David felt his shoulders tense as his cousin sauntered over, an unfamiliar man in an expensive suit following a few paces behind. Well, well, the inheritance meeting, Steve called out, his voice carrying the same mocking tone it had in the lawyer's office. You're really going through with this, huh? He looked over the tractor with exaggerated disappointment. What a waste of time. If you were smart, you'd sell it to a collector for parts and take the bargain. David felt his face flush. Before he could respond, Bill stepped forward, his weathered frame suddenly imposing despite his age. This tractor's worth more than scrap, Steve. Your uncle knew that, even if you don't. No, Steve's smile didn't reach his eyes. Sure, sentimental value and all that. Meanwhile, I've got developers interested in this land who'd pay good money. They don't want an old barn and junk cluttering up the property. The man in the suit remained silent, surveying the barn with calculating eyes. David noticed him taking photos with his phone, methodically documenting the space. Who's your friend? David asked, nodding toward the suit. Just a business associate, Steve replied dismissively. We're evaluating the property's development potential. He turned back to the tractor. Seriously, David, I can find a buyer for that thing. Save yourself the trouble. It's not for sale, David said firmly. Grandpa left it to me for a reason. Steve's laugh was sharp. Yeah, because no one else wanted it. Look, be reasonable. You've got a kid to support, and from what I hear, you could use the money. The pointed reference to David's financial struggles stung. Lisa must have been talking to Steve's wife. The thought of his financial problems being gossip fodder for the family made his stomach clench. We're good, David replied, his voice tight. Thanks for your concern. After Steve and his associate left, the mood in the barn remained tense. Charlie broke the silence. Your cousin's a real piece of work. Always has been, David sighed. Even when we were kids. Bill was staring thoughtfully at the door where Steve had exited. Seems mighty interested in getting rid of that tractor. More than makes sense for a piece of junk. Jason, who had been quiet during the confrontation, suddenly piped up. Dad, I found more markings. Look here inside the control panel. They gathered trying again as Jason pointed out additional etchings, partially hidden by decades of grime. David felt a chill despite the barn's heat. What had his grandfather been trying to tell him? And why was Steve so eager to get the tractor off the property? That evening, David set up a workspace in his garage, clearing out camping equipment and holiday decorations to make room for what would become their restoration headquarters. Jason helped, asking surprisingly thoughtful questions about how engines worked and what each tool was for. And as they organized the space, David explained his plan. We'll start by documenting everything. Then we'll remove the engine, which is the biggest job. Charlie said he'd help us with that next weekend. Jason nodded, arranging wrenches in size order on a pegboard. Do you really think we can fix it? I do, David replied, surprising himself with his certainty. It'll take time, and we'll make mistakes, but we'll get there. He paused, watching his son. This isn't just about fixing a tractor, Jason. Sometimes the most valuable things can't be measured in dollars. Your great-grandfather understood that. I think that's why he left it to me. Because you understand that too, Jason asked, looking up from his task. David smiled. I'm trying to. The next few weeks established a rhythm. Weekdays were for research and planning. David spent evenings at the kitchen table cleaning small parts in solvent and studying repair manuals. Jason would find him there hours later, surrounded by gaskets, springs, and small metal components arranged in careful order. The boy would sometimes sit with him asking questions or just keeping him company while doing homework. Weekends were for hands-on work. Charlie would meet them at the barn, guiding them through the process of carefully dismantling the tractor, labeling and cataloging each part. Bill would often join them, sharing stories about Robert Foster and the farm's history that made David see his grandfather in a new light. Your grandpa was the smartest farmer in the county, Bill told them one Saturday as they worked on removing the transmission. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. During the farm crisis in the 80s, when everyone else was losing their land, Robert managed to hang on. Never would say exactly how he did it, but he came out stronger than before. David found himself absorbed in the work, the precision and focus it required, pushing aside worries about money and job security. His supervisor at the insurance company had mentioned possible layoffs coming, but in the barn, elbow deep in tractor parts, those concerns seemed distant. The engine removal proved to be the most challenging task yet. Charlie brought an engine hoist and Bill showed up with his grandson Kevin, a college kid who needed community service hours and wasn't afraid of getting dirty. With all 5 of them working together, they managed to extract the massive engine block from the tractor's frame. Each part told a story of the tractor's working life. The wear patterns on the clutch showed thousands of hours of field work. The scratches on the loader arms revealed encounters with rocks, fence posts, and stubborn tree stumps. Even the rust seemed to have character, creating unique patterns across the metal surfaces. Your grandfather was meticulous about maintenance, Bill observed, pointing to recent grease fittings and evidence of regular oil changes right up until the tractor's final breakdown. This seizure probably happened because he stored it without proper preparation. Happens to the best of us. As they worked, Kevin asked questions about farming, about the history of the land, about why anyone would put this much effort into an old tractor. His questions made David articulate things he hadn't fully understood himself. It's about continuity, David found himself explaining while struggling with a stubborn bolt. This tractor was part of something bigger. A way of life, a connection to the land, a family legacy. When you restore something like this, you're not just fixing machinery. You're preserving a piece of history. By the end of the day, they had the engine completely removed and sitting on a stand. The tractor looked naked and vulnerable without its heart, but also ready for the transformation ahead. David took pictures to document their progress, already imagining the before and after photos he'd share once the project was complete. That night, he fell asleep with aching muscles and oil seeming under his fingernails, but with a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. The following Monday brought reality crashing back. David's supervisor called him into his office first thing in the morning. The company was restructuring, cutting back on middle management. David's position was being evaluated. Nothing certain yet, but he should prepare for all possibilities. The drive to pick up Jason from school that afternoon was a blur of anxiety. Without his job, how would he pay the mortgage, Jason's tuition? The tractor restoration was already stretching his budget to the breaking point. Jason climbed into the car, immediately sensing something was wrong. Bad day at work, David forced a smile. Just some changes happening, nothing to worry about. Are you going to lose your job? The directness of the question caught David off guard. Sometimes he forgot how perceptive 12-year-olds could be. I don't know yet, he admitted. But if I do, we'll figure something out. We always do. Jason was quiet for a moment. We could sell the tractor parts. Charlie said some of them are worth money. The suggestion, practical as it was, felt like a knife twist. We're not selling the tractor, Jason. That's not an option. Why not? It's just an old machine. David gripped the steering wheel tighter. Because sometimes you have to finish what you start, even when it gets hard, especially when it gets hard. Later that week, David received a notice from Jason's school. Tuition was due in 2 weeks, and there was a gentle reminder about his payment being late last semester. The amount seemed to glare at him from the paper, a sum that would once have been manageable but now loomed like an insurmountable obstacle. That evening, Lisa called. Her voice had the particular tone it always took when money was the subject. The school called me about Jason's tuition. They said you haven't confirmed payment for next semester. David pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm handling it. They shouldn't have called you. Well, they did. Look, David, if you're struggling, just say so. Maybe it's time to consider public school. There's nothing wrong with... I said I'm handling it. He cut her off more sharply than intended. Jason stays at Westridge. End of discussion. After hanging up, David sat at his desk, staring at his bank account balance on the computer screen. The numbers weren't adding up no matter how he arranged them. Something would have to give, and soon. The engine block sat on his workbench like a patient waiting for surgery. Charlie had agreed to guide him through the rebuild process, teaching him skills he'd never thought he'd need. Rebuilding an engine is like solving a three-dimensional puzzle, Charlie had explained. Every piece has its place, and everything has to work together perfectly. They started with a complete teardown, cataloging each part and measuring everything for wear. The cylinder walls needed boring, the crankshaft required grinding, and the valves were beyond saving, but the engine block itself was solid, a testament to the quality of 1950s engineering. The machine shop work would take 3 weeks and cost more than David could comfortably afford. But watching Jason's growing interest in the project, seeing him research Ford tractors online, and sketch ideas for the restoration made it impossible to consider abandoning their efforts. When Jason discovered another set of mysterious markings inside the engine block, David's curiosity deepened. These weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, placed where only someone disassembling the engine in would find them. RF plus key il's truth was etched in small, precise letters where the valve cover would normally hide them. RF is Robert Foster, right? Jason asked, excitement in his voice. But what's the key? And what truth? David shook his head. I don't know, but your great-grandfather clearly wanted someone to find these messages. When Bill saw the markings, his weathered face creased in thought. Robert always said the real value of anything is rarely what it appears to be on the surface. Sounds like he left you a trail to follow. The mystery added a new dimension to the restoration project. Each time they disassembled a part, Jason would meticulously clean it, searching for additional markings. David found himself looking forward to their weekend work sessions with an enthusiasm that surprised him. Despite the financial pressure, despite the uncertainty at work, the time in the barn had become a sanctuary of sorts. Steve visited the barn again the following weekend, this time alone. He watched silently from the doorway as David and Jason cleaned parts, his expression unreadable. You're really going through with this, he finally said, not a question but a statement. David nodded without looking up from his work. We are. Dad, should I show him the markings? Jason asked, glancing between his father and Steve. David hesitated, then nodded. Jason pointed out the various etchings they'd discovered around the tractor. Steve's face remained impassive, but David noticed his cousin's hands clenched slightly. Probably just manufacturing marks, Steve dismissed, or Grandpa being eccentric in his old age. He kicked at the dirt floor. Listen, I've got buyers coming to look at the property next week. I need this barn cleared out. David looked up sharply. The will gave me 6 months to remove the tractor. It's only been 6 weeks. Plans change. Steve shrugged. Developers want to break ground before winter. Then they'll have to work around us, David replied evenly. We're not finished and we're not rushing because it's convenient for your buyers. Steve's face hardened. Always stubborn, weren't you? Even as a kid. That's why Lisa left, isn't it? Too stubborn to change? The barb hit its mark. David felt his face flush, but before he could respond, Jason stepped between them. My dad's not stubborn. He's determined. There's a difference. Steve looked surprised at the boy's intervention. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. With a final glance at the disassembled tractor, he turned and left. Thanks for that, David said quietly when Steve's truck had rumbled away. Jason shrugged, returning to the part he'd been cleaning. He was being a jerk. The following Friday, David was called into his supervisor's office again. This time, the news was definitive. His position was being eliminated. He'd have 4 weeks severance pay and then he'd be on his own. The supervisor seemed genuinely regretful, but the decision had come from corporate headquarters. Nothing personal, just business. David walked to his car in a daze, the cardboard box containing his desk belongings feeling unnaturally light in his arms. 15 years with the company ended in a 15-minute conversation. He sat in the parking lot, staring at the insurance company's logo on the building, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Charlie asking if they were still on for working on the engine tomorrow. David stared at the message, tempted to cancel. What was he doing pouring money into an old tractor? When he'd just lost his job, it was madness. But the thought of telling Jason they were giving up felt worse somehow. The boy had finally found something he was excited about, something that was bringing them closer after the divorce had driven a wedge between them. How could he take that away? David texted back a confirmation to Charlie, then drove to pick up Jason from school. He decided not to share the news about his job just yet. No need to worry the boy until he had a plan. That weekend, they focused on preparing the engine components for reassembly once the machine shop work was completed. Charlie noticed David's distraction but didn't press him. Instead, he kept Jason engaged, teaching him how to clean and inspect parts properly. Bill arrived mid-morning with sandwiches and sodas for everyone. As they ate lunch in the barn doorway, enjoying the late summer breeze, the old farmer studied David's face. "Trouble's weighing on you, son." David hesitated, glancing at Jason, who was showing Charlie something on his phone. Lowering his voice, he admitted, "Lost my job yesterday. Haven't told Jason yet." Bill nodded slowly, his eyes sympathetic but not pitying. "Your grandfather lost everything in '59. Drought took the crops, bank took the East Field. Next spring, he was back at rebuilt from nothing." The old man took a bite of his sandwich. Foster men don't stay down long. The simple vote of confidence meant more than David could express. He nodded his thanks, feeling some of the weight lift from his shoulders. After lunch, Bill pulled David aside while Jason and Charlie worked on the hydraulic system. "There's something you should know. I've been hearing rumors that Steve's in financial trouble. The farm operation's been losing money for years, and he's got creditors breathing down his neck." "Is that why he's in such a hurry to sell to developers?" David asked. Bill nodded. "Likely so, but there's something else. Your grandfather used to talk about insurance, about making sure the family land would be protected no matter what. He was real secretive about it, especially in his last few years." "You think it has something to do with these markings we're finding?" "Wouldn't surprise me a bit," Bill replied. "Robert Foster never did anything without a reason." The conversation stayed with David as they worked through the afternoon. What had his grandfather been protecting, and why leave clues on an old tractor that most people would have scrapped without a second thought? When they finished for the day, David decided to explore the barn more thoroughly. While Jason packed up tools, he examined the structure's corners and hidden spaces, looking for anything unusual. In the back corner, partially hidden by old feed sacks, he discovered a small door he hadn't noticed before. It was padlocked, the metal corroded with age. "Jason, bring the bolt cutters," he called. The lock gave way with a reluctant snap. The door opened to reveal a small storage space. Inside were boxes of old farm records, equipment manuals, and what appeared to be personal papers. David pulled out a dusty folder labeled Ford 8N in his grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Inside were the original purchase documents from 1952, maintenance records kept meticulously for decades, and photographs of a much younger Robert Foster proudly standing beside his new tractor. David felt a lump in his throat as he showed the photos to Jason. "He looks like you," Jason observed, studying a picture of Robert in his 30s, one foot propped on the tractor's wheel, a confident smile on his face. "I never thought so," David replied. "But maybe you're right." Tucked at the back of the folder was an envelope addressed simply to the restorer. With trembling fingers, David opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "If you are reading this, you have chosen to restore rather than replace. Good. The easy path rarely leads anywhere worth going. The seat holds more than comfort. Look beneath the surface for what truly matters." RF, David read the note twice, his pulse quickening. "The seat," he murmured, looking at the tractor's torn seat across the barn. "We need to check the seat." Jason's eyes widened. "Like a treasure map? You think great-grandpa hid something inside the seat?" "One way to find out," David replied, already moving toward the tractor. With careful hands, they removed the tattered seat from its mounting bracket. The vinyl covering was torn and deteriorated, the foam padding crumbling to dust when touched. David had planned to replace the entire seat assembly, having found a reproduction online. Now he examined it with new purpose. Using his pocket knife, he began carefully cutting away the remaining vinyl and padding. The work was slow, deliberate. Jason watched intently, barely breathing, as his father peeled back layers of material. The knife hit something solid. Not the metal spring base David expected, but something else. Something that felt deliberately placed rather than accidentally dropped. Working more carefully now, he pulled away foam and fabric until he could see what was hidden beneath. It was a wrapped bundle about the size of a paperback book, carefully sealed in oilcloth in plastic bags. Father and son exchanged a look of disbelief. With trembling hands, David cut through the protective layers, revealing an envelope with his name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. "It's addressed to me," he whispered, holding up the envelope for Jason to see. He knew I'd be the one to find it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn floor, David Foster held in his hands what appeared to be both an answer and a new question. A message from the past that would change his future in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The broken tractor, dismissed as junk by everyone else, had just proven its true worth went far beyond what anyone could have guessed. David stared at the envelope for a long moment, his name written in his grandfather's flowing script, seeming to pulse in the fading barn light. Jason shifted from foot to foot, the suspense almost too much for his 12-year-old patience. "Open it, Dad," he whispered, as if peeking too loudly might make the envelope disappear. With careful fingers, David broke the seal and withdrew several folded documents. On top was a letter written in the same distinctive handwriting as the envelope. "David," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then you're the man I always believed you could be." David's breath caught in his throat. He had to pause, the weight of his grandfather's words landing heavily on his shoulders. After collecting himself, he continued reading aloud so Jason could share in the discovery. "I've watched our family change over the years, seen priorities shift from stewardship to acquisition, from building something lasting to chasing quick profits. That's the way of the world, perhaps, but not the Foster way. At least, not as I understood it." The letter explained everything. Robert had been quietly accumulating assets for decades, mineral rights on seemingly worthless land that later proved to be rich in natural gas, timberland, purchased during the farm crisis when prices bottomed out, railroad stock that had appreciated enormously as transportation infrastructure became more valuable. "The tractor was my test," the letter continued. "I knew that only someone who understood real value would bother to restore it. Only someone who respected the work of previous generations would put in the effort to bring it back to life. I hid these documents in the one place I was certain they'd be safe, inside something the wrong person would never bother to examine." Behind the letter were stock certificates, property deeds, and financial statements that represented a fortune David had never known existed. As he flipped through the pages, his hands trembled. The mineral rights alone generated quarterly payments that dwarfed his annual salary at the insurance company. "You always were different from the others," the letter concluded. "You understood that some things can't be bought or sold. They can only be earned through dedication and respect for what came before. Use these assets wisely, not just for yourself, but for the legacy they represent. And maybe keep an old tractor running to remind yourself where it all began. Grandpa Robert." David read the letter 3 times, tears blurring his vision. The documents represented enough wealth to change his family's life completely. But the real treasure was understanding how deeply his grandfather had known and trusted him. Robert had designed an elaborate test that would ensure his true legacy went to someone who would honor it properly. Jason's voice broke through his thoughts. "Dad, are we rich now?" The question was so direct, so childlike in its simplicity, that David couldn't help but laugh. A release of tension that had been building for months, years even. "Not rich exactly, but we're going to be okay." He carefully refolded the documents, tucking them back into their protective covering. "We should get these somewhere safe before we do anything else." The drive home was surreal. The same road they'd traveled dozens of times now seemed different somehow, as if the world had shifted on its axis. Jason peppered him with questions. What would they do with the money? Could they move to a bigger house, buy a new car? Get a gaming computer, David answered cautiously, trying to temper his son's excitement, while his own mind raced with implications. The immediate financial pressure was off. Jason's tuition, the mortgage, the restoration costs. But Robert's letter had made it clear that this wasn't just about money. It was about responsibility, about carrying forward values that were becoming increasingly rare. That evening, after securing the documents in the small fireproof safe he kept for important papers, David called Charlie to share the news. His friend's reaction was exactly what he needed. Amazed but not entirely surprised. "Your grandfather always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else," Charlie laughed, "using a broken-down tractor as the key to a treasure hunt. That's some next-level thinking right there." David also called Bill, who seemed equally unsurprised by the revelation. Robert mentioned once that he'd found a way to make sure the right person inherited what mattered most. I thought he was being philosophical. Should have known better. The discovery of the hidden documents didn't change David's commitment to finishing the tractor restoration. If anything, it made him more determined to do the job right. This machine had protected his inheritance, had been the vessel for Robert's faith in him. The least he could do was restore it to its former glory. With the financial pressure removed, David could now purchase higher quality parts and take the time to do everything properly. Instead of cutting corners with aftermarket components, he hunted down original Ford parts or the best available reproductions. The tractor deserved nothing less than authentic restoration. Jason's attitude toward the project shifted dramatically. The boy who had been reluctantly participating now threw himself into the work with enthusiasm. He spent hours online researching the history of the Ford 8N, joining tractor forums, and connecting with restoration experts who were impressed by his interest at such a young age. The engine rebuild progressed quickly with Charlie's expert guidance. The machine shop work came back sooner than expected, the quality evident in the precision of the newly bored cylinders and the mirror-like finish on the ground crankshaft. Assembling the engine became a meditation of sorts. Each component carefully examined, cleaned, and fitted into place with a reverence that bordered on ritual. On a crisp Saturday morning in early October, they reached the moment of truth. The rebuilt engine, now reinstalled in the tractor's frame, was ready for its first start attempt. Charlie had walked them through the final preparations, checking oil levels, fuel lines, and electrical connections. A small crowd had gathered: Charlie, Bill, Kevin, and even a few other local farmers who'd heard about the project through Bill's extensive network. David connected the battery, freshly charged and ready. Jason stood by the front wheel, eyes wide with anticipation. The moment felt significant beyond just mechanical achievement. It was a connection across generations, a fulfillment of a promise neither of them had known they were making. David turned the key and the starter motor engaged with a healthy whine. 3 revolutions, 4, 5. Then suddenly the engine caught. A cough, a sputter, and then the rebuilt Ford Flathead came to life with a smooth, powerful rumble that brought tears to Bill's eyes. "That's exactly how she sounded when she was new," the old farmer said, his voice thick with emotion. "Robert would be proud, son. Real proud." The success of the engine rebuild energized the entire project. Next came the hydraulic system overhaul. New seals, fresh fluid, careful adjustment of pressure settings. The loader arms moved smoothly for the first time in years, responding to controls with the precision the engineers had intended 7 decades earlier. The bodywork presented a different kind of challenge. Each piece had to be stripped to bare metal, a painstaking process of sanding through layers of paint, primer, and rust. David found himself enjoying the meditative nature of the work, the steady rhythm of sanding, the gradual transformation from oxidized relic to clean, prepared metal. One evening as they worked late in the garage, Jason looked up from the fender section he was prepping. "Dad, what are you going to do about getting another job?" The question caught David off guard. He'd been so focused on the tractor and processing the implications of his inheritance that he hadn't given much thought to his employment situation. His severance package would run out in 2 weeks. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "The documents Grandpa left will help us financially, but I still need to work. It's important." Jason nodded thoughtfully. "You know what would be cool if you could do this kind of stuff all the time? Restoring old machines and things." The idea settled in David's mind, taking root. He'd always enjoyed working with his hands solving mechanical problems. The insurance job had been steady, but never fulfilling. Maybe this was an opportunity rather than a setback. That night, unable to sleep, David sat at his computer researching vintage tractor restoration businesses. There were specialized shops across the Midwest, catering to collectors' museums and enthusiasts who wanted to preserve agricultural history. The more he read, the more the idea appealed to him. Starting a small restoration business, perhaps expanding into other vintage farm equipment, or even classic cars eventually. The next morning, he called Charlie to float the idea. His friend's enthusiasm was immediate. "I've been saying for years this town needs a good restoration shop. The closest one is over in Des Moines, and they're booked solid. With your engineering background and what you're learning from this project, you'd be a natural." The seed of a new direction had been planted, but David knew he needed to focus on completing the current restoration before making any major life decisions. The Ford 8N had become more than a project. It was a transition point, a bridge between his past and whatever future was now opening up before him. As October progressed, they continued with the bodywork preparation. David had arranged for a professional automotive painter to apply the final coats of Ford blue paint, but all the prep work was their responsibility. Jason proved particularly skilled at the detailed sanding required for a perfect finish, his young eyes better able to spot imperfections in the metal. They were so engrossed in their work that they almost missed the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. David looked up to see Lisa stepping out of her BMW, dressed in the sleek city clothes that had become her uniform since moving to Chicago. Jason tensed immediately, his shoulders rising defensively. Lisa surveyed the garage-turned-workshop with undisguised skepticism. "So this is where you've been spending all your time?" Her gaze landed on the partially restored tractor in the center of the space. "It still looks like junk to me." David fought back the defensive retort that sprang to his lips. "Did you need something, Lisa? You didn't mention you were coming to town." "Parent-teacher conference next week. I assumed you knew." Her tone implied he should have remembered, though she'd never mentioned it. "We need to talk about Jason's tuition for next semester. The school called me on again." The familiar tension descended, though now the financial concern was different. David knew he could easily afford the tuition with the inheritance, but he wasn't ready to share that information with Lisa yet. The discovery still felt private, something between him, Jason, and the memory of his grandfather. "The tuition's taken care of," he said simply. "You don't need to worry about it." Lisa's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Really, because last time we spoke, you were on the verge of asking me to help out." "What changed?" Jason interrupted before David could respond. "Dad got a better plan, and we're fixing Grandpa's tractor. It's actually worth a lot when it's restored." Lisa's expression softened slightly when she looked at her son, though the skepticism remained. "Well, it's good to see you interested in something, I suppose, though I'd rather it were your schoolwork. Mrs. Brennan mentioned your math grades are slipping." The criticism landed heavily in the previously light-hearted atmosphere. Jason's face fell, his earlier animation fading. David felt a surge of protectiveness. His overall GPA is still excellent, and he's learning practical skills here: measurement physics, mechanical engineering. It all ties together. Lisa waved this away as if swatting a fly. "I'm taking Jason to dinner. We can discuss the tuition situation afterward." After they left, David stood alone in the garage, the half-assembled tractor, a silent witness to the uncomfortable exchange. Despite the inheritance, despite the progress they'd made, Lisa still had the power to disrupt their newfound equilibrium with just a few words. He turned back to his work, focusing on the tangible task in front of him, rather than the emotional aftermath of Lisa's appearance. The sheet metal responded to his efforts, gradually revealing its true form beneath the accretion of years. There was something deeply satisfying about the process, uncovering what had always been there, just hidden beneath layers of neglect. When Jason returned later that evening, his mood was subdued. He worked silently alongside David for several minutes before finally speaking. "Mom wants me to spend more time in Chicago with her and Greg. She says I need cultural experiences that I can't get here." David kept his expression neutral, though his stomach clenched. "What do you want to do?" Jason shrugged, focusing intently on the piece he was sanding. "I told her I want to finish the tractor first. She said that was ridiculous, that it's just an old piece of farm equipment." "And what do you think it is?" The boy looked up, his young face serious. "It's more than that. It's like A message from great-grandpa, a connection to our history. Mom doesn't get that. The simple wisdom in his son's words made David's chest tighten with pride. No, she doesn't. But you do, and that's what matters. They worked late into the evening, the rhythm of their tasks creating a wordless harmony between them. By the time they finished for the night, the awkwardness of Lisa's visit had dissipated, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of progress made. The following weekend brought an unexpected development. David arrived at the barn early Saturday morning to find the padlock broken and the door ajar. His heart racing, he approached cautiously, phone in hand, ready to call the sheriff if necessary. The interior showed signs of a hurried search. Boxes moved, old equipment shifted, but the tractor parts they'd carefully organized remained untouched. Whoever had broken in hadn't been interested in the restoration project. David immediately called Bill, who arrived within 20 minutes, his ancient Chevy kicking up dust on the farm lane. The old farmer surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes. They were looking for something specific. Any idea what? David shook his head, but a suspicion was forming. The storage area where we found Grandpa's records. It's been completely ransacked. Anything missing? David checked the boxes they'd previously examined. Hard to tell. We only went through a fraction of what was stored here. Bill rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Might be time to move everything valuable out of here. Steve's been acting strange lately, according to folks in town. Talking big about development plans one day, then dead silent the next. Something's not right there. They decided to transport all of Robert's papers and the remaining tractor parts to David's garage. Charlie arrived with his pickup truck, and between the three of them, they emptied the storage area by noon. Jason helped organize the boxes in the garage, his natural meticulousness making him perfect for the job. While sorting through one of the boxes, Jason called David over. "Dad, look at this." He held up a faded photograph of Robert standing beside a young Bill and several other men in front of what appeared to be a mine entrance. On the back was written Morgan County Project, 1978, in Robert's handwriting. Bill studied the photo recognition dawning on his face. "I'd almost forgotten about this. Your grandfather bought land in Morgan County back in the 70s. Everyone thought he was crazy. It was old coal country, played out decades earlier. But Robert insisted it would be valuable someday." "Is that one of the properties listed in the documents we found?" David asked, trying to recall the details of the numerous deeds. Bill shrugged. "Could be. Robert kept some things close to the vest, even from old friends." That evening, David spread the inheritance documents across his dining room table, searching for any mention of Morgan County. He found it on the third page, a property deed for 200 acres along with mineral rights that had been separately purchased. According to a recent statement, these rights were generating substantial quarterly payments from a natural gas company. But there was something else. A notation in Robert's handwriting at the bottom of the deed: second key in Morgan County, first key in the tractor, both needed. The cryptic note aligned with the etching they'd found: RF plus key equals truth. But what was this second key, and what truth was Robert referring to? The question haunted David as they continued with the restoration. The engine was now fully operational, the hydraulics functioning perfectly. The bodywork was nearly complete, the bare metal primed and ready for paint. Tommy had helped with the electrical system, replacing the entire wiring harness and installing a new generator. "Modern tractors have computers," Tommy observed as they connected the last of the wiring. "But there's something beautiful about the simplicity of this old electrical system. Everything you need, nothing you don't." As they worked, David shared his idea of starting a restoration business. Charlie was enthusiastic, offering practical advice and even suggesting they could partner on certain projects. The seed planted early, it began to sprout, developing into a viable plan that excited David in a way his insurance career never had. With the tractor nearly complete, David turned his attention to the mysterious reference to Morgan County. Using the property deed as a guide, he located the land on maps, a rural area about 3 hours' drive away. According to county records, the property remained undeveloped except for the natural gas wells that had been drilled in the last decade. "We should go check it out," Jason suggested one evening as they reviewed the information together. "Maybe there's another hidden message like in the tractor." The idea made sense. If Robert had gone to such lengths to create his elaborate inheritance test, it seemed likely that the second key would require physical presence to discover. They planned the trip for the following weekend. Charlie agreed to continue work on the tractor's final details while they were gone, eager to see the project completed before the first snow. The night before their Morgan County expedition, David was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. He bolted upright, heart pounding. A crash from downstairs galvanized him into action. Grabbing the baseball bat he kept in his closet, he moved quickly to Jason's room. His son was already awake, eyes wide with fear. "Dad, someone's in the house," he whispered. "Stay here, lock the door behind me, and call 911. David instructed, handing Jason his cell phone. Adrenaline coursing through his veins, David moved quietly down the stairs. A flashlight beam swept across the living room, illuminating overturned furniture and scattered papers. The beam settled on the small, fireproof safe, now pried open and empty. "No," David gasped, the sound escaping before he could stop himself. The flashlight jerked in his direction, momentarily blinding him. David raised the bat, preparing to defend himself, but the intruder bolted for the back door. David gave chase, but the dark figure disappeared into the night before he could get a clear look. The police arrived minutes later, taking statements and dusting for fingerprints. The evidence pointed to a targeted break-in. The safe had been the primary objective, with other valuables left untouched. The inheritance documents were gone, along with a letter from Robert, explaining his intentions. As dawn broke, David sat at his kitchen table, the violation of his home compounding the loss of the precious documents. Jason remained close, the break-in having shaken his sense of security. "What do we do now?" Jason asked, his voice small. David looked at his son, seeing the trust and fear mingled in his eyes. "We keep going. Those papers were important, but they're not the whole story. Your great-grandfather left another key in Morgan County, remember? We find that we might understand what's really happening here." Their planned day trip now took on greater urgency. After filing the police report and reinforcing the broken window, they set out for Morgan County, the 3-hour drive stretching before them like an invitation to answers. The property proved difficult to find, unmarked on rural roads that twisted through rolling hills and abandoned coal country. Using the GPS coordinates from the deed, they eventually located a rusty gate set into a fence line that had seen better days. A faded "no trespassing" sign hung from the chain that secured the gate. "This is it," David confirmed, checking the coordinates against the property description. 200 acres formerly mined for coal in the early 20th century. The chain on the gate was secured with an ancient padlock coated in rust, but still functional. David examined it closely, noting that unlike the rest of the metal, the keyhole appeared clean, as if it had been used recently. "We can't get in," Jason observed, disappointment evident in his voice. David studied the lock more carefully. Something about it seemed familiar. Then it hit him. The shape of the keyhole matched a small key they'd found attached to the tractor's ignition system, one they had assumed was for a long-lost equipment locker. "Wait here," David instructed, returning to the car. From the glove compartment, he retrieved the small pouch of tractor keys they'd brought along for reference. Among them was the unusual key, slightly ornate for farm equipment, with a distinctive pattern that now made sense. The key slid into the padlock smoothly, turning with a satisfying click. The chain slithered through the gate posts, allowing them access to the property. "Grandpa really did think of everything," Jason whispered, a note of awe in his voice. They followed a overgrown path that showed signs of recent use, broken branches and disturbed ground suggesting someone had passed this way not long ago. The trail led them deeper into the property, eventually opening onto a clearing where the remains of mining operations were still visible. Concrete foundations crumbled at the edges, reclaimed by nature over decades of abandonment. In the center of the clearing stood a small structure that appeared newer than its surroundings, a concrete shed with a metal door secured with another padlock identical to the one at the gate. David used the same key, gaining entry to a space that smelled of dust and metal. The interior was spare, a single shelf holding a metal box, a folding table with a map spread across it, and what appeared to be drilling reports from the natural gas company. David approached the metal box, finding it locked with yet another keyhole that accepted their tractor key. Inside the box was a leather-bound journal and a sealed envelope labeled with David's name. The journal contained Robert's meticulous notes spanning decades, observations about the property, geological surveys he'd commissioned privately, and cryptic references to something he called the Morgan County insurance policy. The envelope contained another letter, this one dated just weeks before Robert's death. "David, if you're reading this, then you've solved the first part of the puzzle. The tractor led you to the initial documents, which in turn led you here. But there's more at stake than just mineral rights and stock certificates. What I've built over the years isn't just a financial legacy, it's insurance against the kind of greed that can destroy families and land alike. The gas company believes they're extracting everything of value from this property. They're wrong. Their surveys missed what the old coal miners discovered by accident back in 1915, a vein of rare earth minerals that runs through the eastern section of the property. I've kept this knowledge private, watching as these elements became increasingly valuable in our technology-driven world. There are those who would exploit this discovery without regard for the land or the future. I've arranged for more comprehensive geological surveys contained in the accompanying reports. Study them carefully. The true value of this property dwarfs what you've already discovered, but with it comes greater responsibility. The choice of what to do with this knowledge is now yours. I trust you to make decisions based on values that can't be measured in dollars alone. The second key is now in your possession. Combined with what you learned from the tractor, you have everything you need to secure our family's true legacy. David's hands trembled as he processed the implications. The journal detailed Robert's discovery of valuable rare earth deposits, elements crucial for electronics, renewable energy, and defense applications. The geological surveys confirmed their presence in commercially viable quantities, potentially worth billions rather than millions. Jason watched his father's face, sensing the magnitude of the discovery. "Dad, what is it?" David looked up from the documents, mind erasing. "Your great-grandfather found something incredibly valuable here, something that could change everything. For us, for the community, maybe even beyond." The sound of a vehicle approaching broke the moment. Through the small window of the shed, David saw a familiar truck pulling into the clearing. Steve's truck. And he wasn't alone. The business associate in the expensive suit accompanied him along with two other men David didn't recognize. "We need to hide," David whispered, gathering the journal and documents. "Quickly." They slipped out the back of the shed, crouching behind the remnants of an old mining cart, as Steve and his companions approached the structure. Through gaps in the rusted metal, they could see and hear the men clearly. "It should be in here," Steve was saying, his voice tense. "The old man kept records of everything. If there's proof of the mineral deposits, this is where he'd store it." The suit-wearing man seemed less certain. "Your information better be solid, Foster. We've invested considerable resources based on your claims." "I'm telling you, the geological survey exists. My sources at the county records office confirmed my grandfather commissioned a private survey right before the Brown company started drilling. He knew something they didn't." The men entered the shed, and seconds later, angry voices erupted. "It's empty. Someone's been here already." David grabbed Jason's arm, motioning for them to retreat into the surrounding woods while the men were occupied. They moved silently, keeping low until they reached a dense stand of trees that provided better cover. "That was Cousin Steve," Jason whispered. "Why is he looking for the same stuff we found?" "I think he suspected there was more to Grandpa's legacy than what was in the will," David replied quietly. "Maybe he found some reference to it in the farm papers, or heard rumors. But now I understand why our house was broken into. Steve must have taken the documents hoping they'd lead him here." They circled through the woods, making their way back to their barn while avoiding the main path. From their vantage point, they could see Steve and his associates searching the area, faces dark with frustration. "We need to get out of here without them seeing us," David murmured. "If they connect us to the missing documents, things could get dangerous." Using the trees as cover, they reached their car undetected. David started the engine as quietly as possible, then drove away with lights off until they reached the main road. Only then did he allow himself to breathe normally again. "What do we do now?" Jason asked, clutching the journal and papers to his chest. "If those minerals are worth billions, people won't stop looking for them." David considered the question carefully as they drove. Robert had entrusted him with this knowledge, believing he would make decisions based on values beyond mere profit. The responsibility felt enormous, especially with Steve and his mysterious backers already involved. "First we finish restoring the tractor," David decided. "That's where this all began, and I think your great-grandfather would want us to complete what we started. Then we study these documents carefully and figure out the best path forward, not just for us, but for the land and what it represents." The drive home was tense, both of them watching for any sign of Steve's truck in the rearview mirror. The inheritance that had initially seemed like a straightforward financial blessing now carried complications neither had anticipated. The broken tractor had led them not just to wealth, but to a moral crossroads that would test David's character in ways Robert must have foreseen. Back at home, David secured the Morgan County documents in a new hiding place, one not even Jason knew about. Then they returned to the garage, throwing themselves into the final stages of the tractor restoration with renewed purpose. The Ford 8N was no longer just a vehicle for an inheritance. It had become a symbol of the values Robert had hoped to pass down, a tangible reminder of what really mattered. Charlie noticed their intensity but didn't press for details when David mentioned they had had an interesting discovery at the Morgan County property. Instead, he focused on helping them complete the restoration, sensing that finishing the project had taken on even greater significance. The painting was scheduled for the following week, the professional painter having agreed to work in David's garage, rather than requiring the tractor to be transported to his shop. This final step would transform the painstakingly prepared metal into the iconic Ford blue that would make the 8N look factory fresh again. As they prepared for this culminating phase, David received an unexpected call from Bill. The old farmer's voice was tight with concern. "David, you need to be careful. Steve's been asking questions all over town. About the tractor, about Robert's papers, about you. Something's got him riled up and I don't like the sound of it." "We had a run-in with him yesterday," David admitted, explaining their encounter at the Morgan County property. "He's working with some investors who seem very interested in the land." Bill was silent for a moment. "There have been rumors for years about what might be in those hills besides coal and gas. Robert never confirmed anything to me directly, but he hinted that he'd found something that would secure the family's future for generations." "He did," David confirmed, "and now Steve's trying to get his hands on it." "Watch your back, son. Steve's always been the type to take shortcuts when he wants something, and with his farm mortgaged to the hilt and creditors calling, he's desperate." The warning cast a shadow over the restoration's final phase. David found himself checking the locks repeatedly at night, jumping at unexpected sounds. He considered reporting their concerns to the police, but without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, it would be their word against Steve's. The painting day arrived, bringing transformation that bordered on magical. The professional painter worked methodically, applying primer-based coat and final color with practiced precision. By evening, the Ford 8N gleamed in its proper blue, looking as though it had just rolled off the assembly line in 1952. "She's beautiful," Charlie whispered, circling the tractor with undisguised admiration. "Absolutely museum quality." Jason beamed with pride, his contribution to the restoration evident in every perfectly prepared surface, every carefully restored component. Even the seat had been rebuilt, new upholstery covering the spot where the documents had been hidden. As David stood back to appreciate their work, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Lisa's number. He stepped outside to take the call, bracing himself for another difficult conversation. Lisa's voice was tight with anger. "David, someone broke into my apartment in Chicago. They tore the place apart, looking for something. When I called the police, they mentioned you'd had a similar break-in recently. What the hell is going on?" The news sent a chill down David's spine. "Are you all right? Was Jason's room touched?" "I'm fine, just shaken up." And yes, Jason's room was searched too. The officer said it looked like they were looking for documents or small valuables. "David, if you're involved in something illegal—" "It's nothing like that," he interrupted. "It's complicated, but I promise you it's nothing illegal. It's about my grandfather's estate." He gave her a simplified version of events. The tractor restoration leading to discovered documents, evidence that Steve might be trying to get his hands on the inheritance. He left out the specifics about the rare earth minerals, focusing instead on Steve's financial troubles and desperate behavior. Lisa's skepticism was evident even over the phone. "This sounds absurd, like something from a bad movie. Are you sure you're not overthinking this?" "Someone broke into both our homes looking for the same documents," David reminded her. "That's not coincidence or overthinking." Her tone softened slightly. "Jason's been talking non-stop about this tractor project. Says you two might start a business restoring vintage machines. Is that true?" The question caught him off guard. "We've discussed it, nothing definite yet." He seems happier, more focused. Even his math grades have improved since he started applying what he's learning to the restoration. The admission clearly cost her some pride. Whatever else is happening with this inheritance mess, that part seems positive at least. After the call ended, David returned to the garage with mixed emotions. The situation with Steve was escalating dangerously, but hearing Lisa acknowledge the positive impact of the project on Jason provided a counterbalance of sorts. The tractor sat in the center of the space, fully restored and gleaming 7 decades of history, brought back to vibrant life through their combined efforts. Tomorrow they would test all the systems one final time, then decide where to go from here, both with the tractor and with the knowledge Robert had entrusted to them. As David stood admiring their work, Charlie approached with a thoughtful expression. You know the county fair is coming up in 3 weeks. They have an antique machinery display every year. This beauty would take first prize, no question. The suggestion resonated immediately. Robert had won several awards at that same event with his farming equipment over the years. The fair would provide an opportunity to showcase their achievement to the community, to people who would truly appreciate the work that had gone into the restoration. That's perfect, David agreed. A public debut. Charlie nodded, his expression turning serious. Might also be smart to have the tractor scene publicly documented officially as yours. Makes it harder for anyone to mess with it if they're trying to cause trouble. The implied concern about Steve wasn't lost on David. Having the tractor officially recognized as his restoration project would establish another layer of protection for Robert's legacy. That night, as David checked the locks one final time before bed, he found Jason sitting on the stairs, a troubled expression on his young face. "What's wrong, bud?" David asked, sitting beside him. Jason's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "If the stuff Great-Grandpa found is worth billions, what happens when people find out? Will they try to take it from us?" The question revealed a maturity beyond his years, an understanding of human nature that was both impressive and slightly heartbreaking in one so young. David put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Your great-grandfather trusted us with this knowledge for a reason. He believed we would make the right decisions even when they're difficult. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, just like we did with the tractor. Step by step, problem by problem, until we figure it out." Jason leaned against him, the simple gesture conveying both trust and the need for reassurance. The tractor was easier, just parts that need to work together. People are more complicated. True, David acknowledged, but the principle is the same. Understanding how all the pieces fit together, what each part needs to function properly. Your great-grandfather understood that about machines and people. As they sat together on the stairs, the restored tractor visible through the garage doorway, David felt the weight of Robert's legacy more profoundly than ever. The old man had set in motion events that would test not just David's mechanical skills, but his values, his courage, and his vision for the future. The broken tractor had been just the beginning of a journey that would reshape their lives in ways neither could fully imagine. The morning sunlight caught the freshly painted Ford 8N just right, transforming the deep blue into something almost luminous. David stood in the open garage doorway, coffee mug, warming his hands against the early autumn chill, admiring how light played across the perfect curves of the hood and fenders. After 3 months of painstaking work, they had transformed a rust-covered Hulk into this gleaming example of 1950s agricultural engineering. Every component had been cleaned, repaired, or replaced with meticulous attention to detail. Jason emerged from the house, backpack slung over one shoulder, stopping short at the sight. "Wow," he whispered momentarily, forgetting his middle school coolness. "It looks brand new, like it just rolled off the assembly line." Their final systems check the previous evening had confirmed what they already knew: the restoration was complete. The engine purred with the confidence of machinery built to last generations. The hydraulics responded with precision to every control input. Even the lights and gauges functioned perfectly, needles sweeping across dials just as they had when Eisenhower was president. "County fair starts Friday," David reminded his son. "Charlie's bringing his trailer this afternoon to help transport it." The upcoming showcase had taken on significance beyond mere pride and craftsmanship. The fair would serve as a public declaration of ownership, a staking of claim to Robert Foster's legacy that even Steve would have difficulty challenging. As Jason headed to school and David to another job interview, both found their thoughts repeatedly returning to the tractor and the Morgan County documents secured in their new hiding place. The knowledge contained in those papers carried weight: decisions that would affect not just their family, but potentially an entire region's economic and environmental future. When Charlie arrived with his flatbed trailer that afternoon, the careful loading of the tractor became a neighborhood event. Neighbors who had watched the restoration progress from a distance gathered to admire the finished product, offering congratulations and taking photos as the Ford 8N was secured for transport. "You've done something special here," Charlie said quietly as they finished strapping down the tractor. "Not just fixing up an old machine. You've honored your grandfather's legacy in a way money never could." The tractor would remain at Charlie's workshop until Friday, safer there behind locked gates than in David's open garage. The decision had been difficult but necessary given the escalating situation with Steve and his mysterious backers. Two break-ins, within days of each other, had sent a clear message about how far they might go to obtain Robert's research. That evening, with Jason at a friend's house for dinner, David spread the Morgan County documents across his dining table, examining them more thoroughly than he had been able to at the property. The geological surveys confirmed substantial deposits of neodymium, dysprosium, and other rare earth elements, critical for modern technology elements, that China currently dominated in the global market. Robert's journal detailed his accidental discovery while reviewing old coal mining records. A notation about unusual mineral formations had caught his attention, leading to discrete testing that confirmed the presence of valuable elements. Rather than immediately capitalizing on the find, Robert had spent years quietly acquiring additional mineral rights in the surrounding area, creating a patchwork of ownership that now constituted one of the largest potential rare earth mining operations outside of Asia. The final pages of the journal outlined Robert's concerns, environmental impacts of extraction, the potential for corporate exploitation, the transformation of rural communities when sudden wealth arrived. He had wrestled with these issues privately for years, ultimately deciding to entrust the decisions to David rather than making them himself. "The easy path is to sell everything to the highest bidder," Robert had written. "The harder path is to find a balance between progress and preservation, between profit and principle. I believe you have the wisdom to walk that harder path, David." The weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. David closed the journal, his mind spinning with possibilities and pitfalls. Whatever decision he made would create ripples extending far beyond his family. His phone rang, the caller ID showing an unfamiliar number. Caution made him let it go to voicemail, but the message left him cold. A smooth professional voice identified the caller as Marcus Ellsworth, senior partner at Vertex Capital Partners. "We understand you've come into possession of certain geological data regarding the Morgan County property. Our firm represents investors with substantial interest in developing those resources. We would appreciate the opportunity to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements at your earliest convenience." David's hands trembled slightly as he set down the phone. Vertex Capital, the same company name he'd glimpsed on the business card of Steve's associate during their confrontation at the property. How had they connected him to the documents so quickly? The answer seemed obvious. Steve must have seen them at the property and reported back. The call confirmed the extraordinary value of Robert's discovery. Companies like Vertex didn't pursue small opportunities. If they were already reaching out directly, the stakes were even higher than David had imagined. Sleep proved elusive that night, his mind cycling through scenarios, weighing options against values, trying to find the path his grandfather believed he would choose. By morning, he had reached only one firm conclusion: he needed more information before making any decisions. The following days developed a surreal quality. On the surface, life proceeded normally, David focusing on job interviews with engineering firms, Jason attending school, and helping finalize preparations for the fair. Beneath this mundane routine, however, tension simmered. David found himself checking rearview mirrors for suspicious vehicles, scanning parking lots before exiting his car, keeping Jason closer than usual. He reached out to several independent experts, a geology professor at the State University, an environmental consultant he'd met through his previous job, a lawyer specializing in mineral rights. Carefully framed hypothetical questions yielded valuable insights without revealing the specific nature of his situation. The geology professor confirmed that domestic rare earth mining would be a game changer for U.S. manufacturing independence, though environmental challenges would be significant. The environmental consultant outlined remediation strategies that could minimize impact if implemented from the beginning, rather than as an afterthought. The lawyer detailed the complex legal framework governing mineral extraction, emphasizing the unusual level of control David would have given his ownership of both surface and mineral rights. By Thursday evening, with the county fair opening the next day, David had formulated the outline of a plan, one that would honor Robert's values while securing his family's future. The Ford 8N would make its public debut as a planned symbol of restoration that went beyond mere mechanics. Friday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the opening day of the fair. David and Jason met Charlie at his workshop where the tractor waited gleaming under shop lights. Loading it onto the trailer, they drove the short distance to the fairgrounds, where the antique machinery display was being assembled. The fair had been a community tradition for over a century, evolving from its agricultural roots to encompass carnival, rides, arts and crafts, competitions, and live entertainment. But the heart of the event remained the celebration of rural heritage, with livestock exhibitions and machinery displays drawing substantial crowds. Their arrival at the antique machinery area created an immediate stir. Several farmers who had known both Robert and the tractor gathered around, marveling at the quality of the restoration. Old-timers shared stories of seeing the Ford 8N in its working days, how Robert had maintained it meticulously for decades before its eventual retirement. "Your grandfather would be proud," one elderly man told David, his weathered hand resting on the tractor's fender. "He always said the best way to honor good machinery was to take proper care of it." The fair officials who judged the antique machinery competition spent considerable time examining the tractor, asking detailed questions about the restoration process. David and Jason took turns explaining their work. The research involved the hunt for authentic parts, the hundreds of hours invested in bringing the machine back to life. By midday, word had spread throughout the fairgrounds about the exceptional restoration. People who normally wouldn't have visited the machinery display made their way over to see the famous blue tractor, creating a steady stream of admirers. Jason fielded questions with growing confidence, his knowledge of the Ford 8N's history and mechanics impressive for his age. The arrival of Lisa in the early afternoon added an unexpected dimension to the day. She stood at the edge of the crowd for several minutes before approaching, her city clothes and polished appearance contrasting sharply with the casual fair atmosphere. "So this is the famous tractor," she observed, circling it slowly. "I have to admit, it's impressive. You two did all this yourselves?" Jason launched into an explanation of the restoration process, enthusiasm, overriding his usual reticence around his mother. David watched their interaction with mixed emotions: gratitude for Lisa's apparent interest, wariness about her underlying motives, hope that she might finally see the value in what they had accomplished together. "Your apartment in Chicago, did the police find anything?" he asked when Jason stepped away to answer a question from one of the judges. Lisa shook her head. "Nothing useful. Just like at your place. Professional job, they said." She hesitated, studying his face. "This really isn't about just a tractor and some inheritance papers, is it? There's something bigger going on." Before David could respond, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the display area. Steve Foster stood watching them, his expression unreadable behind sunglasses. The associate from Vertex Capital stood beside him, along with two other men, whose stance and alertness suggested more than casual interest. Lisa followed David's gaze. "Is that your cousin? Who are those men with him?" "Trouble," David replied simply. "Lisa, take Jason and go enjoy the fair. Stay in public areas. Okay, I need to deal with something." To his relief, she nodded without argument, gathering Jason and moving toward the midway, despite the boys' protests. David turned his attention to Steve and his companions, who were now approaching the tractor display. "Quite a restoration," Steve called out, voice carrying over the ambient fair noise. "You've been busy, cousin." The Vertex representative stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Foster, Marcus Ellsworth, I believe you received my message?" David shook the offered hand briefly. "I did. This isn't the place for that discussion." Ellsworth's smile never reached his eyes. "Perhaps not, but time is becoming a factor. My clients are prepared to make a very generous offer for the mineral rights and accompanying documentation. The sort of offer that would secure your family's financial future for generations. And if I'm not interested in selling," the smile tightened fractionally, "everyone has a price, Mr. Foster. It's simply a matter of finding it." Steve moved closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Take the deal, David. These aren't people you want to fight. There was something in his cousin's tone, fear perhaps, or desperation, that gave David pause. What have you gotten yourself into? Steve? Before his cousin could respond, one of the fair officials approached, clipboard in hand. Mr. Foster, the judges have reached their decision. They'd like to present the award for the antique tractor restoration category. The interruption broke the tension momentarily. David nodded to the official, then turned back to Ellsworth. I'll be in touch next week. That's all I can offer right now. The award ceremony drew a substantial crowd. The Ford 8N took first place in its category, with the judges specifically commending the authentic restoration techniques and attention to historical accuracy. As David and Jason accepted, the blue ribbon cameras flashed and the local newspaper reporter jotted notes for a feature story. The public recognition accomplished exactly what Charlie had suggested, establishing a documented record of their ownership and work on the tractor. Any attempt to interfere with it now would raise immediate questions. Throughout the afternoon, David kept Lisa and Jason close, always aware of Steve and the Vertex representatives moving through the fairgrounds. They seemed content to maintain distance for now, but their presence cast a shadow over what should have been a day of uncomplicated celebration. As evening approached, with the fair lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky, Bill Morgan arrived with several members of the Early Day Gas Engine and Tractor Association. The old farmer beamed with pride as he inspected the award-winning restoration. Knew you'd do it right, he told David. Robert's tractor couldn't have found better hands. The association members expressed interest in featuring the Ford 8N at upcoming events, extending the public documentation of David's ownership even further. Their enthusiasm for the restoration and connection to agricultural heritage reinforced David's growing conviction about the right path forward. As the fair began winding down for the evening, they prepared to return the tractor to Charlie's secured workshop. The loading process attracted attention from lingering fairgoers, including a man who identified himself as a reporter for a regional farming publication. Would you mind if I did a feature on this restoration? He asked, taking photos of the tractor as it was secured to the trailer. There's growing interest in preserving agricultural heritage. Your story would resonate with our readers. David agreed to an interview the following week, recognizing another opportunity to solidify the public record of their work. Each article, each photograph, each public appearance of the restored tractor created another layer of protection for Robert's legacy. Back at Charlie's workshop with the tractor safely stored behind locked gates, David finally had the opportunity to share his emerging plan with his friend. Charlie listened attentively as David outlined the Morgan County situation and his developing response to it. Instead of selling the mineral rights outright, I'm thinking of creating a managed trust, David explained. Controlled extraction with strict environmental oversight, profits directed partially to community development in the region, partially to research into more sustainable mining practices, and partially to our family. Charlie whistled low. That's thinking big. These Vertex people won't like it cuts into their profits. Probably not. But I've been researching alternatives to their offer. There are smaller mining operations with better environmental records, university research partnerships, even government programs interested in developing domestic rare earth sources. We have options beyond just selling to the highest bidder. The approach aligned with Robert's values while acknowledging the reality that the minerals would likely be extracted eventually. By maintaining control, rather than simply selling the rights, David could ensure the process honored both the land and the communities connected to it. The following morning, while Jason was at a friend's house, David received an unexpected visitor. Steve's truck pulled into the driveway, but his cousin was alone this time, without his Vertex associates. David met him on the porch, keeping the door closed behind him. Steve looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, his typically confident demeanor replaced by something approaching desperation. We need to talk without the suits around. David studied his cousin's face, noting the nervous glance toward the street. Come in. At the kitchen table, Steve's hands shook slightly as he declined coffee. I made a mistake, David. A big one. When I found references to the Morgan County property in Grandpa's papers, I thought I'd discovered his secret nest egg. My farm's underwater, 3 bad harvests in a row, equipment loans I can't repay. I needed a win. So you went looking for whatever Grandpa had hidden. Steve nodded miserably. Found records of the geological surveys enough to piece together that there might be something valuable there. Took it to some investors I knew. They brought in Vertex. And now you can't control them. David concluded, the pieces falling into place. The break-ins at my house, at Lisa's apartment, that wasn't your idea. I swear, David, I just told them about the minerals. They took it from there. Steve's face crumpled slightly. These guys play hardball. Once they realized what might be at stake, He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a mottled bruise. They made it clear failure isn't an option. The injury confirmed what David had suspected. The Vertex partners weren't simply aggressive businessmen, but something more dangerous. What exactly did you promise them? Access to the Morgan County minerals. I let them believe I had more control over the inheritance than I actually did. By the time they realized the property and rights had gone to you, they were already committed. Steve looked up, genuine fear in his eyes. They want those mineral rights, David, one way or another. The implied threat hung in the air between them. David considered his cousin this man who had mocked his inheritance and now sat broken at his kitchen table. Why are you telling me this now? Because it's gone too far. These aren't people who take no for an answer. And, Steve hesitated, we're still family. Despite everything, the admission seemed to cost him considerable pride. David recognized the offering for what it was, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that lines had been crossed. The tractor, Steve continued. I get it now. Why Grandpa left it to you. He knew you'd actually restore it, not just sell it for parts. He trusted you with more than just an old machine. David nodded slowly. The tractor was the test, to see who would recognize value beyond the obvious. And I failed. The simple statement carried the weight of a much larger recognition, not just about the inheritance, but about values and choices that stretched back years. Before David could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Bill Morgan's name. Bill, what's up? The old farmer's voice was tight with urgency. There's smoke coming from Charlie's workshop. Lots of it. Fire trucks are on their way, but it doesn't look good. David's blood ran cold. The tractor there, months of work, the physical embodiment of Robert's legacy, was in that workshop. I'm on my way. Steve must have read the expression on his face. What's happened? Fire at Charlie's shop, where the tractor is stored. David was already moving toward the door, grabbing his keys. Steve followed him out to the car. I'm coming with you. They arrived to find the workshop engulfed in flames, fire trucks positioned around the perimeter, hoses directing powerful streams of water that seemed to make little impact on the inferno. Charlie stood watching helplessly from behind the emergency cordon, his face streaked with soot. I was gone for less than an hour, he told David as they joined him. Went for breakfast at the diner. Came back to this. David watched the flames consuming the building, grief rising in his throat. All their work, all those hours of painstaking restoration disappearing into smoke and ash. The symbolic connection to his grandfather, the physical manifestation of their shared values, all being destroyed before his eyes. Fire investigators moved methodically around the scene's perimeter, taking photographs and notes. One of them approached Charlie with questions about the workshop's contents, potential ignition sources, whether anything unusual had been noticed before the fire. Gasoline accelerant, David overheard one firefighter telling another. Multiple points of origin. This wasn't accidental. Steve's face hardened as he registered the same information. Vertex, he murmured. This is their message. See what we can take from you if you don't cooperate. The fire eventually yielded to the firefighters' efforts, but not before the workshop was gutted. As the smoke cleared enough to assess the damage, Charlie received permission to approach the structure with the fire marshal to identify critical items. David waited with growing dread, certain that nothing could have survived the intensity of the blaze. When Charlie emerged from the charred remains of the building, however, his expression held bewildered relief rather than confirmation of total loss. It's there, he called to David. Damaged but intact. They moved it. Confusion gave way to hope as David followed Charlie through the blackened doorway. The interior was a scene of devastation. Tools, destroyed workbenches, collapsed, the roof partially caved in. But in the far corner, somehow spared the worst of the fire, sat the Ford 8N. Its paint was blistered in places, some of the rubber components melted, but the core of the tractor remained solid. Someone pushed it away from the main accelerant point, as the fire marshal noted, examining tire tracks in the soot. Deliberately saved it from the worst damage. David ran his hand along the tractor's fender, feeling the heat still radiating from the metal. The restoration wasn't completely destroyed. Damaged, yes, but repairable. The core components they had so painstakingly rebuilt remained intact beneath the cosmetic damage. Outside, Steve was speaking urgently into his phone, his expression oscillating between anger and fear. When he rejoined David, his face was grimly determined. They've crossed a line. This isn't business anymore. It's criminal intimidation. You're going to help me. David couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Steve looked at the damaged tractor, then back at his cousin. Grandpa was right about you. About us both, really. I've been chasing easy money while you were willing to put in the work. He took a deep breath. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm not letting this stand. Those Vertex bastards used me to target my own family. The fire ultimately proved to be the turning point, not just in their conflict with Vertex, but in the relationship between the cousins. Steve provided a detailed statement to the police about his interactions with the investment firm, including names, dates, and enough specifics to launch a formal investigation into arson and criminal intimidation. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the fire featuring a photo of the award-winning tractor from the county fair and detailing the suspected arson. The community's response was immediate and supportive. Offers of help with re-restoration poured in, along with widespread condemnation of the attack on a beloved piece of local heritage. In the days that followed, David implemented multiple aspects of his plan simultaneously. He engaged an attorney specializing in mineral rights to establish the framework for the Morgan County Trust. He filed formal complaints with state and federal authorities regarding Vertex Capital's intimidation tactics. And he began the process of repairing the fire damage to the Ford 8N, now stored in Bill Morgan's barn, with round-the-clock security provided by volunteers from the Tractor Association. Jason threw himself into the repair work with determination that outstripped even his previous enthusiasm. They tried to destroy great-grandpa's legacy, he told David, as they carefully removed damaged components. We're not letting them win. The publicity surrounding the fire created unexpected opportunities. A regional business journal requested an interview about the mineral rights situation, allowing David to publicly outline his vision for responsible development. Environmental groups expressed interest in the planned trust structure that would mandate sustainable extraction practices. Even the governor's office reached out, recognizing the potential economic impact of a major rare earth discovery within the state. 2 weeks after the fire, with the police investigation progressing and Vertex executives facing multiple inquiries, David received another visitor. Marcus Ellsworth arrived alone, his typical polished confidence noticeably diminished. My partners have authorized me to present a revised proposal. He began, placing a folder on the kitchen table. One that incorporates many of the sustainable development concepts you've been discussing publicly. David left the folder untouched. Why would I consider any proposal from Vertex after what happened at Charlie's workshop? Ellsworth's expression remained carefully neutral. Vertex Capital categorically denies any involvement in that unfortunate incident. We are a legitimate investment firm with a reputation to protect. Save it for the investigators, David replied. We both know what happened. What we know, Ellsworth countered smoothly, is that certain individuals who presented themselves as acting on Vertex's behalf may have exceeded their authorization. Those relationships have been terminated. The careful phrasing suggested that Vertex was cutting ties with whoever had orchestrated the fire, creating deniable distance between the company and the criminal acts. David suspected that the individuals in question were the same men who had accompanied Ellsworth at the fair. The fact remains, Mr. Foster, that Vertex possesses the capital and expertise to develop these resources efficiently. Our revised proposal addresses your concerns about environmental impact and community benefit while still providing excellent returns on investment. David finally opened the folder, scanning the documents within. The terms were indeed significantly improved: profit sharing with local communities, environmental remediation guarantees, even research funding for sustainable extraction methods. But the control structure remained the same. Vertex would ultimately make the decisions that mattered. I appreciate the revised offer, David said, closing the folder, but I'm proceeding with the trust structure. The minerals will be developed, but under conditions that prioritize long-term sustainability over maximum short-term profit. Ellsworth's mask slipped slightly, frustration showing through the professional veneer. You're making a mistake. Without our resources behind you, development will take years longer. The value of these minerals could change. Market conditions shift. You're gambling with billions. I'm honoring my grandfather's values, David corrected. He could have cashed out any time over the past 30 years. He chose not to for a reason. The executive gathered his materials defeat, spot evident in the set of his shoulders. If you change your mind, the offer remains open for 30 days. After Ellsworth departed, David joined Jason in Bill's barn, where the Ford 8N was gradually returning to its former glory. The fire damage had required replacement of wiring, rubber components, and refinishing of the painted surfaces, but the core restoration remained intact, a testament to the quality of their original work. As they applied fresh paint to the repaired hood, Bill approached with an envelope in his weathered hands. Found this while cleaning out some old files. Thought you might want to see it. Inside was a faded photograph from the late 1970s, Robert Foster standing proudly beside the Ford 8N, which was hitched to a plow. A much younger Bill stood nearby, and sitting on Robert's lap on the tractor was a small boy with a familiar smile. That's you, Bill confirmed. Couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 at the time. Your grandfather used to say you had a natural feel for the machine even then. David studied the image memories surfacing that had been buried beneath layers of adult concerns. The feeling of the tractor's vibration, the smell of diesel and freshly turned earth, his grandfather's strong hands guiding his smaller ones on the steering wheel. I'd forgotten this, he admitted, tracing the outline of the tractor in the photograph. Completely forgotten he used to let me sit with him. Bill nodded. Robert always played the long game, planting seeds that might not bear fruit for decades. I reckon he saw something in you even then, something he wanted to nurture. The insight reinforced David's conviction about the path forward. Robert had indeed played the long game, cultivating values that would guide decisions long after he was gone. The tractor had been both the test and the key, a way of identifying who would carry forward his vision while providing the means to unlock his larger legacy. 1 month after the fire, with the Ford 8N fully restored for a second time, David hosted a gathering at the Morgan County property. The attendees included county officials, environmental experts, representatives from a mid-sized mining company with an excellent sustainability record, and members of the local community. Jason proudly drove the tractor onto the property, the blue paint gleaming in the autumn sunlight. David outlined his vision for the Morgan County Trust controlled extraction of the rare earth elements with strict environmental safeguards, profit sharing with the local community, and investment in research to develop more sustainable mining practices. Rather than maximizing short-term profit, the trust would balance economic benefit with environmental stewardship, creating a model for responsible resource development. Lisa attended the presentation, her initial skepticism gradually giving way to reluctant admiration as she witnessed the scope of what David had created. You've turned a broken-down tractor into all this, she observed as they watched Jason giving rides to local children on the Ford 8N. I didn't see it coming. Neither did I, David admitted. But Grandpa did. He set all this in motion decades ago, waiting for the right moment and the right person. The trust structure was formalized the following week with extraction planning scheduled to begin in the spring. The first phase would focus on detailed environmental assessment and community input, ensuring that development proceeded with full transparency and local support. Steve's farm situation resolved with unexpected grace. As part of his cooperation with the authorities investigating Vertex, he received consideration for his own financial difficulties. A regional agricultural bank offered refinancing terms that would allow him to maintain ownership while transitioning to more sustainable farming practices. The land that had been in the Foster family for generations would remain so, though Steve's approach to stewardship had been fundamentally altered by recent events. I was so focused on what the farm was worth that I forgot what it was worth to me, he confessed to David during a rare moment of vulnerability. Watching you with that tractor made me realize what I'd been missing. As winter approached, David made a significant decision about his own future. Rather than returning to corporate employment, he leveraged his engineering background and newfound restoration expertise to establish a vintage equipment restoration business. Charlie joined as a partner, contributing his mechanical knowledge and workshop space in a new, larger facility built to replace the one destroyed in the fire. Their first major commission came from an agricultural museum seeking to restore a collection of historic farm implements. The work combined David's technical skills with his growing passion for preserving agricultural heritage, creating a business that honored craftsmanship in history while providing for his family's future. Jason flourished in the new environment, spending afternoons after school in the workshop learning skills that would serve him throughout life. His grades improved dramatically, particularly in mathematics and science, as he applied classroom concepts to practical mechanical problems. Lisa's initial concerns about his involvement gave way to recognition that her son was developing confidence and capability beyond what traditional education alone could provide. The Ford 8N became the centerpiece of the new business, a rolling advertisement for their restoration skills and a tangible connection to the values that had shaped their journey. David often found Jason showing it to visitors, explaining not just the mechanical aspects of the restoration, but the story behind it, the test, the discovery, the fire, and the ultimate triumph of persistence over adversity. On a crisp December morning with snow dusting the fields surrounding their workshop, David and Jason took the tractor for a drive on a nearby farm owned by one of Bill's friends. The machine performed flawlessly, despite the cold, its rebuilt engine purring with the same confident rhythm it had delivered for Robert Foster decades earlier. As they paused atop a small rise overlooking the rolling Iowa landscape, Jason posed a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Do you think Great-Grandpa knew we'd find the Morgan County stuff? Or was he just hoping?" David considered the question, watching his breath form clouds in the winter air. "I think he created the possibility. He couldn't know for certain who would inherit the tractor or whether they'd choose to restore it, but he built a path that could lead to the discovery if the right person came along. Like a treasure map where you have to prove you deserve the treasure before you can find it," Jason suggested. "Exactly like that. Not just about being clever enough to solve the puzzle, but about having the right values to use the treasure wisely." The trust had already begun generating preliminary returns as plans for extraction developed. David had established college funds for Jason and dedicated a portion to charitable foundations supporting agricultural education and environmental conservation. The bulk remained in the trust, ensuring that the benefits would extend to future generations while maintaining the principled approach Robert had envisioned. As they guided the tractor down the slope toward home, David reflected on how completely his life had changed since that day in the lawyer's office. The broken tractor, dismissed as junk by everyone else, had become the key to unlocking not just wealth, but purpose. Robert Foster had understood that wealth without values could be destructive, that resources without responsibility could cause more harm than good. By designing his unusual inheritance test, he had ensured that his legacy would be entrusted to someone who recognized that some things can't be measured in dollars alone. 6 months later, a National Agricultural Heritage Foundation contacted David about including the twice-restored Ford 8N in their registry of historically significant machines. The organization was documenting important vintage equipment restorations across the country, creating a record of machines and the stories behind them. They requested permission to include the Ford 8 and recognizing its unique journey and the values it represented. During their visit to photograph and document the tractor, the Foundation's historian made an observation that resonated deeply with David. "Tractors like this built modern America," the elderly man noted, running his hand along the gleaming fender. "Not just by working the fields, but by embodying a certain approach to life, building things to last, maintaining them with care, passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. When we lose those values, we lose something essential." As spring returned to Iowa, the Ford 8N took its place in the field once more, not as a museum piece, but as a working machine. David and Jason used it regularly for small projects around their property, maintaining it with the same care Robert had shown for decades. The tractor had completed a circle of sorts, from working machine to neglected relic to restored treasure and back to purposeful use. The Morgan County Trust began its careful development of the rare earth deposits, implementing the environmentally conscious extraction plan David had insisted upon. The approach garnered attention from industry publications and environmental groups alike, presenting a potential model for resource development that balanced profit with protection. On the anniversary of Robert's passing, David drove the Ford 8N to the small rural cemetery where his grandfather was buried. Jason rode beside him on the fender, just as David had once ridden with Robert. They parked the tractor near the gravesite, its blue paint vibrant against the green spring grass. "We brought it back, Grandpa," David said quietly as they stood before the headstone. "And we found what you left for us to find, not just the minerals, but the lesson about what really matters." Jason placed a small model of the Ford 8N on the headstone one he had carefully painted to match their restoration. "Thanks for the test, great-grandpa. We passed." As they climbed back onto the tractor for the drive home, David reflected on the journey that had begun in that lawyer's office 16 months earlier. The broken tractor had indeed taught them that the most valuable inheritances aren't always the most obvious ones. Sometimes what seems like a burden is actually a gift, and sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in places where only the right person would think to look. The Ford 8N's engine caught immediately, settling into the smooth, confident rhythm that had become so familiar. David released the clutch, and the tractor moved forward, carrying them home along country roads where 3 generations of Fosters had traveled before, connected by more than blood, bound by values that, like the tractor itself, had been built to endure.